Is democracy under threat?
Well, democracy is always under threat, although I do think democracy right now is under threat globally and internally. Globally, because we have a growing, what I call the axis of authoritarian states, China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, Syria has now joined that group, and others in the Middle East moving towards a much closer coalition with China, who themselves don't have elected governments. So permanently their task and China's determination is to get rid of democracy. They don't believe democracy is the right form of government. They believe their authoritarian government is the same. So with that goes getting rid of the rule of law
as Russia,
and of human rights.
Most of the Middle East as well. I mean, there's certainly that case.
Yeah.
In terms of this country, though, the Prime Minister talked about extremism in this country. He specifically mentioned not just Islamist extremists. He says Islamist extremists and far-right groups are spreading a poison. That poison is extremism. A bit of a tautology there. But it aims to drain us of our confidence in ourselves as a people and in our shared future. After 14 years of Conservative Party rule, why is our confidence in ourselves and our shared future being drained? Isn't that down to a total abject lack of action to tackle this extremism?
Well, there's no question there is extremism in existence. Of course, it's a minority position. The majority of those who live in this country want to get on with their lives. So this is about a minority, but who have a disproportionate effect. So we have terrorism, which we know exists. And in fact, I think probably at least 3/4, if not 80% of those terrorists under watch now are Islamicists, in other words, extreme people who claim links to Islam, but at the same time are terrorists trying to find their way. So, but there are others as well. There's been others, the IRA, there's others as well that threaten and make poisonous death threats. I've had a number of death threats from various groups. I can never figure out who they are, but basically, that does exist at the moment. Is it worse than it has been before? Yes, I think recently the Gaza, awful Gaza saga and the murder of the Jewish people who were peacefully partying, etc., that's had a shockwave effect around the world. You can see it, marches endlessly, all of that stuff. And it's the stuff that goes on in the marches, which again is, is not the majority, but a minority do repeat these ridiculous slogans that are very dangerous and threatening to Jewish people. Many come to march simply to stop the killing and the death and the war, which is quite legitimate. But there are others who embed themselves into these things and use an opportunity to try and turn opinions into a very aggressive...
But the Prime Minister, in that address outside number 10 Downing Street, he was talking about how, you know, people shouldn't allow, on those marches, shouldn't allow their marches to be hijacked by extremists. Those marches are organised by groups, most of which have links to the Hamas terrorist leadership. But they're organised by those people. They've not been hijacked by them. They are using the people who are genuinely and quite rightly concerned about the Palestinian civilians under attack. But you know, you don't see people on those marches calling for, you know, down with Hamas. Anyone who goes on those marches and has an anti-Hamas placard or anything like that, they have to be surrounded by police to protect them. I mean, doesn't sound like a minority to me anymore.
Well, they are a minority, but they're a minority that get their voice heard. The point I'd make very simply, I don't disagree with you, is that, you know, how many of the people who cry foul over what's going on in Gaza have ever bothered to cry foul over the genocide of the Uyghur under China, or the persecution of the Christians in China, or the Inner Mongolians in China, or the crackdown in Hong Kong, or the terrible war now in Ukraine, which has cost many, many more lives, and where they're targeting deliberately civilian places.
That leads us nicely into George Galloway, the new MP for, well, is it Rochdale, is it Gaza? It's difficult to tell. He mentioned Gaza in his acceptance speech in the early hours of Friday morning. He ran on a very divisive campaign ticket, completely different leaflets to Muslim areas and white areas of the city, making it very clear what his priorities were. You know, he's someone who has praised Saddam Hussein, a man who killed millions of Muslims in the Iran-Iraq war, you know, an invasion of Kuwait. Like he has happily praised Bashar al-Assad, who massacred millions of his own people and forced them many into exile in Syria. Very, very unhappy about what's happening in Gaza, though, probably because it's happening to them as a result of actions by Israel. It doesn't seem to have that much of an issue with Hamas. He's certainly certainly been very friendly with Hezbollah in his time. Does his election as MP for Rochdale, his swearing in Parliament today, is that a game changer? Is that a wake-up call to the political class, or is it a danger to our democracy?
Well, I've known George Galloway for years, and he tends to alight on areas where he can create the greatest division, feed off that division, and either get elected or to get heard, etc. One thing that I always keep saying to people: where was George Galloway and others when Iran continues to execute thousands of peaceful democracy campaigners in Iran? The government could do a lot more right now to kind of snuff out some of this stuff. For example, we have the Iranian Republican Guard is not prescribed yet by the UK. There are 2 Iranian banks that exist here in London. These are also helping finance surreptitiously lots of what's going on in terms of the Gaza thing. And they are the supporters of Hamas. Without Iran, Hamas wouldn't have done what they've done. Hezbollah wouldn't move. What's going on down amongst the Houthi on the Red Sea, where they deliberately target and threaten shipping, which is going to put the cost of food and fuel up again because they can't go on the shorter route. That's all organized by Iran. And yet the UK government still hasn't prescribed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are right behind all of this stuff. America's done it, asked us to prescribe them, and some other countries have done it too. But the UK should do. And I think there are actions we could take to basically start trying to shut off the nonsense that Iran gets up to.
No, well, apparently we're going to stop letting hate preachers into the country, which is something I thought we'd done many years ago.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more.
What about George Galloway? You mentioned too, Iran and Russia. He's happily taken payments to the tune of many thousands of pounds as a host of TV shows on both Russian and Iran-backed television. Given that both of those countries are not democracies in any meaningful sense, where people are hounded for, journalists in particular and politicians, basically murdered or imprisoned or tortured for their views. What do you think about a man like that being in the House of Commons, taking their money? I mean, I've been asked to go on RT a number of times, and I always make it very clear that no one in this country should be working for RT.
Well, I agree. I find his views reprehensible, but he's been elected, and the one thing democracy, whether you like the result or not, he has been elected to represent the people, and therefore he's got to come and speak, unless of course he starts talking up the idea of attacks, terrorism, and the killings. I mean, the truth is the UK government, following Rishi Sunak's speech, could act now. What we need to do is cut off the resources available to all of these very hardline extremists who want to destroy the way we live our lives and all our freedoms. It's quite ironic quite a lot of the time that those often that march don't realize that some of the money behind a lot of what's going on hugely in Gaza, etc., is an organization that is busy killing thousands on thousands
Can I
of its
ask
own
you,
people in Iran.
Just finally and very briefly, if you would, because look, we haven't got the budget yet, we don't know, there's not much point discussing too much about it until we've actually heard what Jeremy Hunt has to say on Wednesday, but talk about whether there be a national insurance cut, an income tax cut of 1p or 2p, who knows whether it's more, they're just playing down expectations. Do you genuinely think there is anyone in this country who has now had enough of the Conservatives after 14 years, who will say, oh, well, in that case, 2p cut in my income tax or national insurance, I'll vote Tory again?
Well, it depends on what you see as tax. If you think tax is just a short-term bribe, then it won't change any opinions. If you see what really this is all about, which is to get the economy growing, people like me think that the economy is now over-tightened with the highest tax rates and with high interest rates. We think the Bank of England is guilty of raising interest rates too late and is now playing catch-up and is going to reduce them too late. So the economy's problem is it's not growing as it should do because the costs of running business, the costs of people's income, if you're in middle incomes, you're sliding across into higher rate tax bands. That is invidious, really, and should be stopped. And so I have only one message to the Chancellor. You need to get growth. This economy is very strong underneath, but it needs growth, and that requires reducing the burdens of regulation, tax, and getting the bank to bring the interest rates down so we can start getting the economy moving. I have a huge faith in British enterprise and people's ability to work. But what you can't do is expect them to do all of this if it's not worthwhile at the end of the day because their taxes are too high. And